yell was different from all the sounds ever heard. The throats of maddened hounds, of starved hyenas and angry beasts in deadly fight over bloody feasts, or wails of souls in purgatory, lost to heaven and all its glory, ne'er cast over man such awful spells of terror as did those rebel yells.
They both had a particular way of yelling. The Northern troops made a sort of hurrah. It was called, one soldier, the deep, generous, manly shout of the Northern soldier. The Confederates, of course, had what was called the rebel yell. We don't really know what that sounded like. One Northerner described it. He said, he described it by describing the peculiar corkscrew sensation that goes up your backbone when you hear it. It was basically, I think, a sort of fox hunt yip mixed up with a sort of banshee squall, and it was used on the attack. And an old Confederate veteran after the war was asked at a UDC meeting in Tennessee somewhere to give the rebel yell. The ladies had never heard it. And he said, it can't be done except at a run, and I couldn't do it anyhow with a mouth full of false teeth and a stomach full of food. So they never got to hear what it sounded like. And he said, and if you've claimed you've heard it and weren't scared, that means you never heard it.
Went down to a Civil War Preservation Trust meeting, and I was riding in a bus on a battlefield tour with someone who told me about one of the original recordings of the rebel yell.
What must it have sounded like when Stonewall Jackson's Virginians charged down Henry House Hill after old Jack commanded them to yell like furies? This, the moment of the birth of what would eventually evolve into the rebel yell. What must it have sounded like? This bone-chilling, mortifying, hair-raising sound is the stuff of legend. How could we today, curious of the past, know what it sounded like?
And I came back from that trip and went on the website and listened to it.
At a 1935 meeting of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, 90-year-old Thomas Alexander, a veteran of the 37th North Carolina Regiment, was asked to deliver his rendition of the rebel battle cry to a local radio station.
I said, wow, that doesn't sound like what I thought it was supposed to sound like. And that piqued my imagination. After we listened to it and reflected on it, the one voice, then came a period of distrust. Could this person be representative of the whole Confederate Army? At that time, we said, we need to find another recording. Did all the normal searches on the internet, and finally saw some reference to the fact that the United Daughters of the Confederacy had a copy of a rebel yell given by a Confederate veteran. And I recall vividly putting that CD on the CD player, and I hit the play button. I hear that exact same sound came pouring out of the speakers, and I remember the flush of saying, we've got it. Here are two different men, two different units, two different times, one being recorded in North Carolina, the other in California, one infantry, the other cavalry, one North Carolina, the other Virginia. This was enough credible evidence that these two guys doing the same sound were representative of the Confederate Army.
Thanks to that recording, History Publishing Company was later able to have the recording amplified and patterned to match the sound of a Confederate company charging across the battlefield.
The 22 years of reenacting discovered something. When we have been doing the rebel yell for all those 22 years, prior to learning the proper rebel yell, we would go on the field and we would give a yell. And it would expel all the air out of our lungs because we yelled at the top of our voice, because we wanted to make it sound as loud as humanly possible and to put fear in the people in front of us. But what that did, it really wore us out. Because as you're marching across the field and you yell at the top of your voice and all the air goes out your lungs, you're gasping for more air. But when you do the rebel yell the proper way with a cadence to it, the high-pitched yelp, the low-pitched bark, and a long high-pitched yelp, it's much like talking. And you don't run out of air and you don't get exhausted. And you can do this marching across an entire field without getting exhausted. And when the Museum of the Confederacy put together their CD, Therebelyelllives, they took these two voices and they blended them together, and they made some high pitch, some lower pitch, so it sounded like a lot more men than just two men. And they put that all together so you would hear what a regiment and a brigade and a division sounded like, and an entire army. Because when you hear men do it in reality, and you hear 40 men or 400 men, it sounds exactly like what the Museum of the Confederacy put out. After I heard the CD for the first time, I knew that this had to be taught to as many Confederate reenactors as possible. Pitched the idea then to the museum about coming out and filming this themselves to a larger unit. And so we did it last year at Cedar Creek with 400 reenactors there.
Gentlemen of the Corps, I, like all of you, do my very best to portray the Confederate soldier in every aspect of his life, from the proper weapons, uniform, tactics, and accoutrements. But there's one thing throughout the years that we have been doing incorrect, and that is the rebel yell. And so that is why I'm here today, so to teach you the proper rebel yell. It is in a cadence of 3. A high-pitched yelp, a low-pitched bark, and then a long high-pitched yelp. It goes, help! Ho! Ho! Help! Ho! Ho! So, here is your chance. Give me a high-pitched yelp. Help! Now give me a low-pitched bark. Ho! Now give me a long, high-pitched yelp. Ho!
Of course, when we were up at Cedar Creek and I taught the 400 of them the proper way to do the rebel yell, we assembled ourselves to do a charge, a bayonet charge across the field.
Charge! Bayonet! Charge!
It was the talk all around camp after that charge. I mean, everybody was enthusiastic about it, because for us to be able to not only know what it sounded like, to be able to recreate it ourselves, it reached something inside all of us that we were very proud to be part of bringing this history back to life.
I am fairly confident that the Museum of the Confederacy captured the real authentic rebel yell from those 2 recordings, but there is another version. In the 75th anniversary of Gettysburg, there was a couple dozen Confederate veterans who gave a rebel yell. It sounded a little bit different. I think it was probably used on occasion, but I don't believe it was the predominant yell. But I'm going to include it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of announcing to you that we are going to make an effort to repeat the old rebel yell. 1, 2, 3. Charge 'em, boys! Charge 'em!
That do-or-die expression, that maniacal maelstrom of sound, that penetrating, rasping, shrieking, blood-curdling noise that could be heard for miles on earth, and whose volume reached the heavens. Such an expression as never yet came from the throats of sane men, but from men whom the seething blast of an imaginary hell would not check while the sound lasted.
Listen, you hear that?